When I was younger, I was introduced to the Amityville Horror, one of America's greatest ghost stories. So, this is a ghost story. Although there may or may not be ghosts in this story. It's possibly real, but some people call it a hoax. I know my weird connection with it, what transpired with me.
Today I will look at the Amityville Horror, my bizarre connection to it. Possibly the start of my relationship with a trickster, or something far, far worse. This is Strange Occurrence, the Amityville Horror, and my strange story. Before we explore the horror, we gotta discuss the murders. The real horror in this tale. Amityville, New York. It at one time was just a quaint coastal village. If you're from Oregon, my home state, Amityville reminds me a lot of Astoria, Oregon, where the Goonies was shot at. It was also a coastal village, just on a different coast, just a little bit of a reference there for you. Amityville's about an hour away from busy New York City. The phrase Amityville comes from the Latin word for friend, according to some. The house I was placed on 112 Ocean Avenue was anything but friendly. In fact, in November 1974, terrible murders took place where over 6 people would lose their lives in bizarre circumstances that's still hard to conceive. This event will reunite theories and beliefs into the paranormal. Amityville, the town, has had rumors of past witchcraft and demons even before the murders of 1974. History says, rumors mostly, maybe even half-truths, that the Montauk tribe believed that the land was rich with negative energy and was infested with dark beings like demons. More rumors, or half-truths, say the legend goes that the tribe's enemies or possessed people with demons living within them were left to die, then buried face down, cursed forever to look into nothing but darkness. In the summer of 1965, the Catholic Italian family DeFeo has moved into the home on 112 Ocean Avenue. By looking in, it was a good time for the large DeFeo family, leaving a smaller apartment for high hopes, which they gladly displayed outside their new home. A home, less than 10 years later, would be a home of horrors. DeFeos had 5 children. The oldest son was Ronald Jr., nicknamed Butch. Ronald Jr. had a love-hate relationship with his father, Ronald Sr. This was even stated by trial attorney William Weber. The father and son would fight all the time and just not argue. Fist fights. Ronald Sr. was abusive to his family. The environment was toxic with hostility. Family situation might not have been the only thing plaguing the home. There seemed to be a supernatural issue as soon as they moved into Ocean Avenue. Ronald Jr. sensed they were now alone in the home. In a 1979 interview, he stated they heard footsteps, pipes banging. The family tongue-in-cheek would state, "Somebody's in the home, ghosts, all that." Another odd comment he made, once in a while you hear screaming, but there was nobody screaming. In the book Amityville Horror by Jay Anson, or maybe it was another interview or possibly another book, I remember it talked about lights flickering, and I think the TV was found on when nobody turned it on. The DeFeos lived there. There seemed to be something going on that wasn't natural.
According to records and documentation from the murder trial, by 1973, violence was erupting in the house.
There was even an incident where the father punched his wife, causing her to fall down the stairs. He did this so he could eat in peace. Ronald Jr. wanted to escape this freak show, and he tried. Ronnie begins to self-medicate. Not only is he bar hopping, but he's doing drugs. He was known to do heroin, LSD, and speed. Violence within the home was so overwhelming during one fight. This was between the father and his sister Dawn. Ronald Jr. grabs a loaded shotgun to end his father's constant terrorization of the family. He points it at his father, pulls the trigger, and it doesn't go off. It was loaded, and it should have. It was like divine intervention, and the father feels this as well. The father surrounds his property with Catholic ideology symbols and statues because of this miracle. DeFeo Sr. was quoted telling his friends that he had all these statues around the house because he had a devil on his back. Was it literal, or devil of a son? Another particular moment before the murders, the nanny, the maid, made statements to DeFeo's defense attorney, William Weber, that Miss DeFeo stated there was going to be a tragedy to her family. According to the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren, proclaimed demonologists, DeFeo Sr. went to the Catholic Church for help. Paranormal activity took place by trying to perform an exorcism. There was shaking of candles, getting knocked over, doors swinging. The church has no records of this event. What is known for a fact, every time Ronnie left the house to get away, he was dragged back by his father. The problems were mounting up for Ronald DeFeo Jr. He was using hard drugs regularly, and his home life was filled with violence. He worked at his family's car dealership. He stole over $19,000. In early 1974, troubled Ronald Jr. gets in a fight with his father and states, "I'll murder you all."
The sad thing is, he actually did.
On the 13th of November, 1974, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. hears voices telling him to kill.
They're gonna kill you, Ronnie.
If I recall properly, he claimed he thought it was God, and then he thought it was the devil another time. A cloaked figure hands him a rifle. While his family slept that November night, he goes into each room with a rifle and kills his entire family. Parents, brothers, and sisters. One by one, he shoots and kills them. His first victims is his father and his wife Louise. Then the children, John Matthew, who was 9, Mark, who was 11, Allison, who was 13, and Dawn, 18. 6 dead. The murders were completed in 15 minutes. Ronald Jr. claims he couldn't stop if he wanted to. There are mysteries to the murders that no one can truly explain. No one woke up during the murder spree. No drugs were found in the family's bodies, so it was ruled out they were drugged before the murder. The families were all sleeping on their stomachs and their bodies were not moved. The bodies have a creepy similarity to the legend of the native tribe, the one about burying enemies face down. He shot his sister Dawn last, that is known. Another mystery that haunts this case, no one heard multiple shots from a loud rifle. No silencer was used. That is proven. Again, I emphasize, the rifle is loud. Now, there is a report about a teenager waking up. He heard DeFeo's dog, Shaggy, barking, but he didn't hear any of the shots. How is this possible? Why didn't the neighbors hear anything? Professor Han Holzer, a parapsychologist, once claimed a strong psychic field could eliminate sound, making a barrier and sound couldn't penetrate it. That would solve, if true, why no one heard shots. Entities using electronic magnetic fields interfere with sound, according to the professor. DeFeo's oldest son eventually confesses to the murder and is charged. William Weber, his trial attorney, wanted to use the insanity plea, but it wasn't allowed. November 21st, 1975, Ronald Jr. was found guilty of all 6 murders. His sentence was 6 to 25 life prison terms. He died in prison on March 12, 2021. He changed his story many times to pawn off his own guilt. He even made a bold claim that his sister killed, and then he was forced to kill her. Supposedly, they hatched a plan to kill their father. Dawn went rogue and murdered everyone because of no witnesses. Ronald Jr. and Dawn wrestled over the gun and he was forced to kill her. Oddly, there may be a sliver of truth to Dawn's potential involvement. This is hearsay. She was seen, allegedly, in a dark cloak with a rifle around the time of the murders. Again, there's no proof she devised a plan with Butch or actually involved in any way. There's another odd rumor about Dawn. Dawn and Ronald Jr. had some sort of inappropriate incestuous relationship. This is sort of explored in the film Amityville Horror 2: The Possession, which is loosely based on Professor Han Holzer's book, Murder in Amityville. I couldn't find any validity to this rumor. I'm not sure how Holzer became privy to the information, but he did investigate the case in the 70s. I'm 50 years late to the party. I wasn't there, so I cannot say it did or did not happen. I'm heavily leaning towards it didn't happen, though. Ronald Jr. changed his story to even his mother killing the children, and several other versions. I truly feel at certain points in his life he did feel some guilt for killing his younger siblings. He couldn't accept what he did. It is a tragedy so many innocent children died that night. They didn't need to. Part 2. The Amityville Horror is born. During the summer of 1975, newlyweds George, an ex-Marine, and his wife Kathy Lutz began to house hunt in order to find a new home for their family. Kathy has 3 kids from her previous marriage: Danny, 10, Christopher, 7, and Melissa, 5. In the fall of 1975, a realtor shows them a home that would be soon dubbed one of America's most haunted houses. The home is big and nice, has a boathouse too. But let's notice the sign that reads High Hopes. They too felt that statement. A little after the family considers buying the home, the realtor discusses the DeFeo massacre. After discussing with the entire family, taking the murders in consideration, the price, $80,000, the space of the home, and all the future could provide, it was way too good to pass up. They decided to buy the home. They even buy the leftover DeFeo furniture for an extra $400. 14 months after the DeFeo murder, the vacant home on 112 Ocean Avenue, some could call it the murder house, would get new occupants. On recommendation from a friend after finding out about the house's colorful past, the murders and possibly other issues, they are suggested to get the home blessed. They get their new home blessed by Father Ralph. This took place the same day they move in. The father's blessing the house.
Everything seems to be fine until he enters the room known as the sewing room. Father Ralph begins blessing. Out of nowhere, he is told to get out by a disembodied voice. He's even struck in the face by an invisible force. Father Ralph has been quoted saying that the sewing room felt really cold, colder than it should have been. This was before the incident with the paranormal. Before leaving, Father Ralph did get an odd warning to the Lutzes about not staying too long in the sewing room. He said it felt off. During a segment of My Amityville Horror, a 2012 documentary about the events of 1975 and beyond, the focus is primarily on Danny Lutz's experience. He's the oldest child of Kathy. He stated after Father Ralph left, he went to the sewing room. He called it the playroom in the documentary, and he found about 400 to 500 flies. He kills about 100 in the newspaper. He brings his mom into the room to show her what he did. She's puzzled. Where are the dead critters? The flies are gone. Danny knew at that point something was off with the home. After the holidays, everything would ramp up in intensity. Kathy stated after the love of Christmas came down, the house's personality and energy changed. It all started with a foul dumpster smell juice odor that permeated throughout the home. The family went around the house opening the windows to air out the stink. Danny opened the upstairs window after some trial and error. This is the one in the sewing room. Once he got it open, it came down with a force on his hands and it smashed them. The combined efforts of George, Kathy, George's friend, which was over that day, and Danny's brother to open the window. Danny's hands are crushed. George studies the window to make sense what just transpired. Kathy and the other kids go in the kitchen to tend to Danny's wounds. While Kathy is getting ice, everyone in the kitchen witnesses an unbelievable sight. The side door slowly opens, and a spirit enters the room. The entity bumps into Kathy, knocks over a butter knife, and it falls to the floor. It then sits down at the kitchen table. They can see the impression on the seat. It then vanishes as soon as it enters the room. Kathy's about to put bandages on Danny's hands, and she notices they have fixed themselves. Except for his pinky finger, which is still crooked today. This is just one of many stories that plague the family. The home seemed to feed off negative energy. Fights began to spark all the time. Personality changed within the home. George is constantly cold, obsessed with firewood. He stopped caring about his appearance. If I remember correctly, he begins to even look like Ronald DeFeo Jr. after a while. Kathy claimed that the house worked differently between the sexes. Men were infested with violent reactions, while women said to be charmed by the house. Each family member saw and felt things differently than the other family members. Strange sounds and smells flowed throughout their new home. Smells like an old perfume aroma. This fragrance lingered randomly. Black stains appeared. Constant temperature changes. Many cold spots. Even 5 feet from a roaring fireplace. Then there was the bugs. One particular bug. You guessed it, that's right, flies. A lot of flies. Weirder still, flies in the dead of winter. This mostly transpired in the sewing room. George has even stated there were no flies when they first looked at the home. While searching their home in the basement, they found a small red room. That didn't appear in the original house plans. The little room also had an odor. Their black lab Harry wouldn't go near it. I think there was even a discussion that Harry would even growl at the room. If I remember correctly, they did some research or it was in the book, and they found it might have to do with animal sacrifices. That was one theory. George is woken up every night at 3:15, the same time as the murders. Kathy is plagued with nightmares about the murders. She even feels penetration of the rams where Miss DeFeo was shot and killed. George notices his entire family begins to sleep on their stomachs. They never slept that way before moving to 112 Ocean Avenue. Every time Kathy or George Lutz or Father Ralph tried to call each other, it wouldn't go through or there'd be static. The rocking chair in Melissa's room would move on its own like someone was sitting there rocking. Melissa gets an imaginary friend named Jody. Jody's a pig and get big or small. Jody even tells Melissa that she will live with Jody in the home forever. George saw glowing red eyes peering down at him from Melissa's room. They even find hoof prints in the snow, and I believe he felt Jody walking him at night. Melissa drew a picture of Jody, and I remember that drawing in the book when I was a kid. Danny too saw this strange apparition. While outside with George, he saw what he describes as a cartoon character of an angry pig with wolf-like teeth and red laser beam eyes. This was coming from his sister's room. They rush upstairs to find the rocking chair moving on its own. Although the experience is different between the Lutz family, they all witnessed some activity as a collective. All the family witnessed the garage door violently slamming up and down. The Lutzes assert during a few interviews that the boathouse was a source of poltergeist activity. George had gone out that night to check the boathouse to find a green slime which he dubbed poltergeist puke, oozing all over the place. Harry the lab, despite only being about a year old, slept all the time, which is uncharacteristic of such a young dog. There's even a story about Harry almost hanging himself to get away from the boathouse. He jumped the fence and was nearly strangled. January 14, 1976, the Lutz flee the house, leaving everything they own inside. They only lived in the home for 28 days. They returned the home back to the bank, sold property at auction, and only kept one keepsake from the home, a cedar box that contained pictures of the children and such. Based on their actions of leaving the home as they did, the Lutz lose over $24,000 put into the home. In today's cash, it would be over $128,000. Even to this day, the Lutz never 100% explain what transpired that night to make them leave everything they own. A few glimpses have been sprinkled through the years. Danny and his brother's bed levitated off the ground. Kathy's appearances were altered to look like an old crone. It took hours for it to fade away. To sum up in my own words, it got too intense and the activity was so overwhelming that fight or flight took over and they flew out of that house quickly. Ed Warren, demonologist, and his wife Lorraine Warren, psychic research and clairvoyant, get involved after the Lutz fled the house. Warrens agreed to investigate their claims. In 1976, Ed and Lorraine TV crew explore the abandoned home. Lorraine is a self-proclaimed psychic and empath. Right away, she senses evil. As the group examines the home for paranormal evidence, they do discover everything was as if they left it that night on January 24th. By the look of it, it's like they went to the store and they were coming home soon, but they were not. Ed Warren even claims to encounter an inhuman spirit in the basement. Ed stated on a scale of 1 to 10 about the encounter, it was a 10. Perhaps he wasn't exaggerating. There's even a famous photograph they took during their paranormal research in which a boy with glowing eyes is seen peeking out of one of the rooms. There was no children present that evening. It was just them and their photographer taking photographs. Is this the spirit of one of the DeFeo children, or something much more sinister at play? The Warrens think it's a demon pretending to be a child, although the photograph has never been authenticated. I'm not sure why you would lie or hoax something like this, though. As for the Channel 5 crew that investigated the Amityville home with the Warrens, no paranormal activity is reported, but something of note did transpire. The cameraman out of the blue had heart palpitations, something he's never had before or since. While he was going up the stairs, he was overcome with something. That is the abridged version of the events that supposedly took place in 1976. Was it real? A hoax? The Lutz claim it was real. Kathy believes it was demonic. I'll touch on that in a bit. Still, no resident after the Lutzes have ever experienced paranormal activity in the home. But if they did experience any, why would they admit it? They run the risk that it would cause a media circus. Wannabe and professional paranormal specialists would want to come in and investigate. This transpired anyways, and the Lutz were sued because of it. It would be 100 times worse if another family admitted to a haunting. Or did this happen already? Now this might be a Mandela effect. I'll get to that subject eventually. I thought one family did talk about strange activity that happened when they lived in the home. I can't find any record of this now. Maybe I'm thinking of another story. Various people claim it was fraud. Others say it was real. Vicious rivalries between. Agendas all around. In the History's Mysteries episode, Amityville Horror or Hoax, William Weber, DeFeo defense attorney, met with the Lutzes. He stated the Lutzes discussed the strange activity in the home. It was alluded to that Weber even considered the defense of a possession angle. The devil possession theory. Professor Hans Holzer claimed that Weber believed that could have been a real thing that happened. Weber was going to write a book. It had 3 outcomes that was going to be left to the reader to decide. The first was Ronald Jr. was a cold-blooded killer. 2, he went insane or was insane. And lastly, 3, he was possessed by supernatural forces. Weber wanted to add the Lutz's spooky tale as part of his tell-all book. Weber called a press conference and thrusted the Lutz into the spotlight. This is what the Lutz exclaimed what happened. They didn't want to do it, but Weber threatened to release the location of their children's schools to the press in order to get the story out. If that's true, that is scummy. This started the feuds between the parties, even a lawsuit. It's a he versus they say. Weber has stated the Lutz has made up the story as a money-making adventure. Still, the Lutz did take a polygraph in order to prove their statements true. They pass. It was conducted by some of the best experts at the time. In 1979, in federal court, Father Ralph states under oath he heard voices say, "Get out." He couldn't confirm or deny what else happened in 112 Ocean Avenue. Allegedly, Weber contacts Professor Han Holzer, a parapsychologist, a year after Lutz's move out. Professor Han Holzer has stated during History's Mystery that no time did Weber say the Lutz's accounts were staged or made up. He even claimed that Weber believed more likely or not that DeFeo was possessed. It made the most sense. First national article about the haunting was written in Good Housekeeping in April '77. Our Dream House was haunted by Paul Hoffman. This introduced more people to the Amityville haunting. Within a year, the biggest written account of the Lutz's experience was published to the masses, form of a future bestseller, The Amityville Horror by Jay Anson. Jay Anson was mostly a behind-the-scenes documentary writer. In the fall of 1977, the book is released. It was declared a true story. The book sold very well. Depending on the edition of the book, some details have been changed. The Lutzes assert that the paranormal events did take place at 112 Ocean Avenue, but some elements have been exaggerated. In the Jay Anson book, it discusses John Ketchum. His legend goes he was chased out of Salem during the Salem witch trials. Ketchum is a warlock. According to the book and myth, after fleeing Salem, he continued his black arts near or on the land of Amityville. There are even legends he was buried somewhere on the property. There is some evidence that Ketchum actually existed. Older deeds has his name Ketchum in them. Even if he did exist, the claims of him being a warlock cannot be proven either way. A strange occurrence in itself, there is a Ketchum Avenue that at one time was near the murder house, possibly still there. Jay Anson pushes the narrative that the land was cursed by Ketchum. Was there an actual Amityville curse of sorts? According to Kathy Lutz, yes. During a taping of one of the History of Mysteries episodes, calamity struck for occupants of 112 Ocean Avenue. Problems for each family. Jay Anson even discusses terrible things that happened to people who just received his manuscript. Some people even died. Another strange occurrence. A little over 3 years after the Lutzes fled their dream home, once it became more of a nightmare, in the summer of 1979, the Amityville Horror was released to theaters. It had such great promotional material. For God's sake, get out! It earned over $80 million, and it became one of the biggest blockbusters of that summer. I love the theme music for this movie. It's eerie and creepy. The movie is well performed, and there are things I like and there are other parts I didn't care for. It would take 26 years before we get another film inspired by the book by Jay Anson and the Lutz's story. In 2005, Ryan Reynolds will star as George in the updated film version of the Amityville Horror. I like the 1979 film more. It's closer to the actual event in the book which was based on. The 2005 film is well acted but takes even more liberties than the original film. Since the 1979 film was such a hit, it spawned multiple sequels. Unfortunately, Jay Anson didn't get involved with any of them. He dies of a heart attack in 1980, 2 years before the first sequel. Basically, a prequel was released. He was 59 years old. Even after the Lutzes moved out of state, the dark forces followed them. Eventually, it did go away. Is any of the Lutzes' story true? Were the Lutzes motivated to profit off the DeFeo tragedy? William Weber boldly claimed that was inspiration to pull the hoax. In my opinion, this doesn't make financial sense. Why would Kathy and George Lutz leave their entire life savings on a gamble? This is the 1970s. You can reach more people now than then. At the time of their story was told, there was no guarantee this scheme, if it was one, would take off and be successful. It doesn't make sense completely if they made up a hoax. Were there embellishments? I believe so. They even admit it. I've read and heard the accusation that George and Kathy were in financial hardship. They conceived this ploy, a haunting, as a way to get out of it. Again, it would make more sense if they lived in the home longer. They only lived there for 28 days. How did they financially go belly up in that short period of time? Even so, there were other avenues and ample time before losing the house. They forfeited the home. Foreclosure. And wouldn't there be a better way to make money or at least recoup some of the investment besides losing it all? Another theory that's been circulated for the last 10 years or so is that George Lutz dabbled into the occult when they moved into the home. This is pointed out in the film My Amityville Horror. Danny Lutz has discussed this very topic in that documentary at George's old place. Before moving to 112 Ocean Avenue, Danny found on George's bookshelf books about rituals and satanic worship. Stephen Kaplan, author of Amityville Conspiracy, a book about Amityville as a hoax. He was the first researcher to be contacted by George to investigate their claims. The Lutzes then removed Kaplan from research in the home, allegedly after Kaplan told him to expose any fraud. During their phone call meeting, George claimed to know nothing of the cult, but Kaplan felt otherwise. George seemed to know about demons and witchcraft and contradicted himself several times. One statement seemed to point out George's interest in demonology for at least a year to two before the events took place at Amityville. Going back to the My Amityville Horror documentary, during one key sequence, a paranormal researcher even claimed he was hired to conduct research by new owners of the Ocean Avenue dwelling in 1977. He brought a psychic with him. This psychic got the impression a lot of ritual magic was done in the house. Perhaps George did do something. If he did play around with dark forces, he caused the infestation of negative spirit energy. Accidentally? Possibly even on purpose. Why would he do it on purpose? Maybe it was to make money. If that's the reasoning, this would give some credence to Weber's claims. He created the situation by shaking the beehive. This is all speculation. I have no proof of these claims. Again, according to the Lutzes, they didn't make a whole lot of money off their story. They fought a lot of lawsuits, costing them income. If the plan was to make a bunch of cash, it didn't go according to plan. Unlike Danny, which didn't want anything to do with the Amityville legacy, George was the opposite. According to Danny, he was proud, boldly claiming, "I'm that Amityville guy." Even if George didn't cause the events, Lorraine Warren did believe that it was a possibility that George was the catalyst for the events. It was attracted to George. Amityville real, or was it a hoax? Well, Ed Warren has a great quote about this question. For the believer, no evidence is necessary. For the atheist and skeptic, no evidence is possible. Part 3. My Strange Story. It's the early 90s. It's past 7 p.m. during the fall. It's dark in Portland, Oregon. My aunt was watching my younger brother and I. My parents had a date night. I liked horror, even back then. I loved the Universal monsters, the Blob, 80s horror icons like Freddy or Jason, even though I didn't watch those yet. I was in the 3rd grade. My aunt pulls out this blood red hardback book. It was the Amityville Horror. I want to say it was the 1st edition. She's reading it. I'm hooked. We talk about Jody the Pig. I look at the picture. Like I said earlier, I saw it when I was a kid. I'm not sure how long we dive into the book. I do remember she gets to the passage that has some demon incarnation phrase supposedly Lutz has found in their research about the home. My aunt states the phrase or saying. Right then my parents pull into the drive. We stop reading. She puts the book away. It's a little chaotic when my parents come in. A few moments later, they take her home. It's my turn to feed the dog, so I do. There's no TV on, no one's talking, my brother's in bed. It's quiet in the house. We had a lab Rottweiler mix puppy and an older dog, Honeydew. The dogs are not in the kitchen as I'm opening up the dog food. I get the can open. The cabinet door next to me, I hear a little kid say, "Hi, Josh." I freeze. I have never heard that voice before. The hairs stand up in the back of my neck. I look around. No one is there. This was the start of the voice or mimics. I never heard it before, but it was a constant thing after that night. Years later, I wonder if it had something to do with the book. Certain things started after that night for sure. Maybe I was hearing things. Maybe it was a tape recording from our answering machine. I don't recall it going off. The house was quiet. Maybe I was so focusing on feeding the doggies, I missed the ring. Then after the beep, the message just played, "Hi, Josh." Wrong number probably. I was 8 or 9, not 3 or 5. That voice is a little kid. The recording malfunctioned and never saved.
No messages.
Maybe that was a possibility. But I heard it clear as day right next to me from that cabinet. There was another incident, one that's way more unexplainable than the first "Hi, Josh." Still the early 90s, a month or two after the Amityville Horror read. I think it's November. My aunt once again is watching us. We read a little more of the Amityville Horror my brother plays with his wrestling figures. We didn't read a whole lot this time, instead we chose to play Nintendo. We started playing Gauntlet 2 on the NES, I think trying to beat it. Which is impossible for the game, you can't beat it. The game just goes on and on and on. We played for about an hour, perhaps more. My brother watches us occasionally while he's wrestling. There's a knock at the door. We pause the game, and we stop what we're doing, we look at each other. My parents didn't pull up, it's way too early. There is another knock at the door. I get up and answer the door, and no one is standing in front of me. Then I look down. Sitting at the base of the door is my Rottweiler lab puppy, Weiler. He isn't wagging his tail, he doesn't bark, he's just staring at me. My aunt and I look around, no one is there. Not to the right, not to the left. I live on a dead-end street. There is not a single person walking or running. No one on a bike. No car was leaving. The street was empty. We had an empty field. No one's walking down that field. The neighbor was gone, so it wasn't him either. That is mystery one. Who knocked on the door? Now comes the biggest mystery. Who let the dog out? He was in the living room when we started playing Nintendo. I think he was napping. The living room door wasn't that far from where we were playing. We didn't have a doggy door. All windows are shut. The back door was the only other door in the house, was shut and locked. We checked. My brother didn't and couldn't let him out. I didn't. Neither did my aunt. We all questioned each other. We would have seen one of us letting him outside. To this day, there is no explanation who knocked. How did Weiler get outside? How long was he gone? What happened? My older dog Honeydew didn't bark at the knock, which was odd. You know how dogs are. He wasn't outside mysteriously either. He laid down on the floor and didn't really care what was going on. I always thought that was abnormal as well. Weiler didn't act normal till he got into the house. The only common denominator is the book, The Amityville Horror. 2 instances, 1 book. Eventually I gotta keep that blood red book, and I read The Amityville Horror. And years later I saw the movie, and I saw 2 of my favorite History Mysteries episodes on The Amityville Horror. It's not the only mystery or strange occurrence I experienced with that dog Weiler. In fact, I dealt with a few odd happenings with a few animals, but that's a story for another time. Well, this is Josh the Retro Dad. I want to say thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, this was about the Amityville Horror, discussing the murders, the horror, and my strange story that's connected to them. Now, I will be doing a follow-up to this video. There's a lot when it comes to the murders. I'll talk a little bit more about the Amityville Horror after diving into all the research, what I kind of think about it. Is it conspiracy? Is it a hoax? I kind of let my opinion known in the video, but there's a lot more to kind of discuss. And I'll discuss my own strange stories. Mostly the dog, the little mimic voice, and I talked about that in the Trickster. No way the dog could have got out. There's no loose floorboards. There's no way the dog could open up the window. We had no doggy door. My brother, my aunt, or myself did not let the dog out. How did he get out? And who knocked on the door to say, hey, your dog is here? Not every episode's gonna have reenactments like this one did. Some of it's gonna be like this. My next one's gonna be about aliens and something that happened to me at church, something that a pastor said that kind of stuck out to me even to this day. I want to say thank you to Corel. Go sub to him. He's the one who did the beats for the Amityville Horror remix theme and the other Amityville Horror beat. And eventually I'll be moving all my stuff from Strange Occurrence off this channel. This is more like my video game channel, but it has a little bit of a crossover. There's a little bit of gaming in it. Last video they'll have gaming about my strange events, but they'll be going to its own channel, Strange Occurrence. And if you like this type of content about paranormal or strange events, follow, subscribe to me as well. I have a lot more coming up. Josh Retro Dad. Stay tuned for the next one.